Welcome to another episode of Eberhart Outdoors. I have my sunlock gloves on because I'm going to be handling this military duffel bag, which has my decoy in it, because on video 91, which was the video where I was out in Kansas in mid-December and I shot that buck, I showed a clip of a decoy with the tail wagger, talked a little bit about it while it was sitting there and the tail was wagging during the actual hunt. But there was some things I forgot to mention. On video number 33 in Eberhart Outdoors, I have an entire video of decoys, Montana decoys, this carry light decoy, and some other stuff. So if you want to get a little more in depth, go back to video 33. So anyway, I use a carry light decoy. I use it sometimes with a 4-point set of antlers, sometimes with an 8-point set of antlers, that like a 100-incher, so I don't scare off bucks in Michigan. You know, they'll come into a hunt. The bucks I want to kill will come into a 100-incher and definitely come into a 4-point. But I use it as a doe decoy a lot too, especially during the rut phases, because a buck would much rather come into a doe decoy than a buck. This military duffel bag holds this decoy absolutely perfectly. I did have to buy a clip here to kind of keep it closed so stuff didn't fall out. But I'm going to take this out of the bag and show a few things. Because when I purchased this, this was a solid body, and I had to cut this hole in it, and I had to put this protective piece of steel on the back when I wasn't using the decoy, because there's a little clip here that on the tail wagger, and I'm going to show that in a minute. This tail wagger has to be mounted to the inside of this decoy if you're going to use a tail wagger. And in some states it's legal, in some states it's not. But there's just this little metal clip here that has to be protected, because if you throw this in a bag and you throw it around, carrying it around and stuff, this will get bent. So I put this little piece of metal on here to protect that clip in storage, and when I'm throwing it around in my van, or when I'm putting it someplace during the hunt when I'm not going to be using it. Something else I did, this is the head. This is one of the legs. Now these all go together really easy. However, and I've got my gloves on here because this is clean. I keep my decoy clean. I wipe it down. Sometimes I even power wash it at the car wash. But these parts here, when you buy one of these, and again this is a carry light, I had to trim these with a simple little razor knife, and you need a sharp blade on it, because these had a lot of little plastic around the outside edges that had not been trimmed off at the factory, and I found it to be very noisy to set up. So by trimming it a lot, basically you can take the leg, put it on the whichever side it's supposed to be on, and twist it without making a lot of noise. If you do that before you trim this thing, that's going to be really noisy. It's noisy even with that, but trimming it made a huge amount of difference. And I was just trimming the excess plastic around here, and I actually made this hole a little bit bigger than it was supposed to be, just so it goes on easier. I did the same thing with the ears. I trimmed them a little bit. The ears just slide into a little slot, and you can have them in different directions. You can have them in alert, where it's trying to hear something forward. Or you can have them in a more relaxed position, which is laid back. And these little pedestals are where the antlers go. So I trimmed the ears so they go in quietly. I trimmed the two rear legs, the plastic around on the legs itself, as well as on the body, so those would go together easily. I had to trim a little bit of plastic. This is the front legs, and this just slides up into a little slot, and then you reach inside and put this little screw down to keep them tight. And antlers, I only have the 4-point antlers here, but you can see I trimmed these down to a 4-point. I also have an 8-point set And I'm not going to just dump this out because there's all kinds of trash in here as far as weeds and bark and stuff. And then this is the tail that the tail wagger comes with, and the tail wagger itself basically just slides onto this little piece of metal right here. And then every time it flicks, you can set it for every 8 seconds or every 16 seconds. It'll flick, and you'd be shocked. That gets the attention of a deer big time over this thing not moving, especially if you got it in weeds. You always want to set a decoy up in the best visibility place possible. And one thing I have found using decoys, where you use them make a big difference. In a heavily pressured state where deer are much more on edge, they don't work as well, especially if you're in an area with a lot of deer, because typically does are what you're going to see first, and does come into this because they're curious, and they will typically get within 5 yards of it and do the head bob, and if it doesn't move or acknowledge them, you know, they will within a few minutes start blowing and possibly snorting and then running off. So they make a lot of commotion if they're not happy that this is a real deer. So I typically will only use a decoy in a place where I expect to see bucks, because I don't want to have doe spook from it prior to the buck coming in late in the evening or whatever. So this is a tail wagger. It's made by a company called Come Alive, and it's relatively easy to install. You just open up a hole in the belly, bolt this to the back side where the tail is actually on the decoy. The tail you get to with the decoy, you have to trim that up a little bit in the back as well. And then you just mount this in there, this tail wagger, and it comes with this little box. This box takes 4 D-cell batteries, and there's a little pin up here that you can move one way or the other to adjust it from 8-second to 16-second tail wag movement. And then in the back here is an on and off switch to start the tail wagger working. And the decoy basically is set up with these 4 spikes. At the bottom of each leg, there's a place where these go in, and then you just stomp them down into the ground with your boot. So that's how this decoy works. It's definitely my favorite decoy, and I've had a lot of different decoys. It's a pain in the butt to carry around because you're usually taking your bow and your backpack. I'm a saddle guy, so I don't have to carry a cumbersome stand. But with the decoy, you got to still have to carry your bow and your backpack's on your back, and then you have to carry this. And this has nice backpack straps that are adjustable, military duffel bag straps, but still it's just cumbersome to carry. That's one issue I have with tree stands. Tree stands are very cumbersome to carry, and if you're hunting pressured areas, you're back in the crap. You're not walking down a nice pristine 2-track like you see on TV with a stand on your back. You're busting through brush to get to where you want to hunt, and it just catches on everything. Same deal with this. You know, this here I use when I'm hunting peripheral areas where I can get to it relatively easy. I would not carry this thing through trash. I would carry a Montana decoy. But this here decoy definitely works better because it's a 3D decoy, whereas a Montana is in a straight line. It's a spring steel decoy, so from the side it looks great. Looks like a real deer. Much more real than this, because it's basically a picture of a deer imposed on fabric. But then if they are going around it and they're looking at it straight on, it's gone. Both sides you can see it, from front and back you can. So there's some other things about using decoys that are relatively important. Anytime you're going to set up a decoy, if you don't have the advantage of having a scent control regiment where you have to pay attention to the wind. In other words, if you're a hunter that has to pay attention to the wind, you play the wind 100% of the time. You need to set your decoy up upwind of you whatever your comfortable shooting distance is. So if you're a 30-yard guy, 35-yard guy, that's where you want to set it up, but you want to make sure it's upwind of you and in a high-profile area where it's got a big visual from the biggest area possible. Because typically, when deer come into a decoy, they're going to circle to the downwind side, especially a big buck. He's going to circle to the downwind side of the decoy to get a sniff of it. So if you put it 30, 35 yards upwind of you and they circle 5 to 10 yards downwind, you're going to have a deer at 20 to 25 yards. Obviously, if you put it on your downwind side and you get busted because you have no scent control regimen that works, any deer coming into it's going to wind you. So that's another huge advantage of having a scent control regimen where you don't have to pay attention to wind direction. So this has to be set up upwind of you if you have to pay attention to wind. And then what I usually do, because again, this is scent free when I'm using it. This here is kept outside in an outside garage where there's absolutely no human odor. It's up in the rafters all year long. And then I only handle it with my scent lock gloves on. So this bag is scent free. I have no issues taking this bag. If I'm carrying it against my body, I'm going to be having my scent lock suit on. My exterior suit I always wear on my entries or my exits. So this is going to be against my scent lock suit, so I'm not going to get any odor on this bag with my entries and exits. So I have no issues of taking this bag once I set up the decoy and putting it 5 or 10 yards away someplace in some weeds or next to a stump or something, roll it up so it's a small profile and the deer won't wind it because there's no human odor on it. And then I will typically put some sort of a scent actually on a scent-free tampon. These are scent-free tampons. And I usually will cut these up into pieces. And I put a safety pin in them. And then I have these little strings. And I pin that tampon to the string, which is just a drag string. And then I will put whatever odor I want on that actual tampon. And usually it's a Tinks 69 Mister. And I'll show that to you. Okay, I just went and got one. This is a Tinks 69 doe in rut. And I rarely ever use scents. But if you're going to set a decoy up, I would advise, because if deer come in downwind, they're going to want to smell something. They're expecting it to smell like a buck if it's got antlers on it, and they're going to expect it to smell like a doe if it doesn't. So my preference is these Tinks canned misters. This one here is a fogger. And these are kind of unique because there's no bacteria in these. These are actually pressurized cans, and there's an aluminum bag inside this pressurized can that's got pure doe in estrus urine in it. Now, yes, this urine was captured probably in June or July because they can put deer into estrus cycle by giving them a shot. So, and that's what they do. That's how they collect so much doe in estrus urine for the market. So this was captured in June or July. So if it were in a bottle, bottles have air in it. And every time you open it and use some, it gets more air in it. So bacteria multiplies and it doesn't end up smelling like it should to a mature buck. I get tons and tons of people say, well, I've done that, and I've done what you said doesn't work, and it's worked for me. I'm talking about mature buck activity. I'm not talking about subordinate bucks, 2.5-year-old bucks, does. That stuff, if you're hunting 3.5-year-old and older bucks in pressured areas, anything you've done in the past, if you've just been shooting 1.5 and 2.5-year-old bucks, is irrelevant. It doesn't matter what worked. You're hunting a different animal. 3.5-year-old and older bucks in heavily pressured areas are a different animal than 2.5s and 1.5s and does. So just because you had something work on a 1.5 and a 2.5-year-old, don't assume it's going to work on a 3.5 or older buck in a heavily pressured area, because odds are it may once in a blue moon. Odds are it's not, and it's very possible you could get busted because of it, because they smell it and they may turn around and leave. But the cool thing about this is there's no bacteria in it. So you can use this multiple times, and all you're doing is taking a little of the urine out of the interior bag of this pressurized can. You're not, every time you touch this mister or fogger, you're not allowing oxygen in to create more bacteria, to allow the bacteria to breed and create more bacteria. So That's pretty important when you're looking at scents. Now, I will also, more often than not, use a doe tarsal gland or a buck tarsal gland, because I always have those on hand from deer I've killed in the past, where I shrink wrap them and mark them. Is this an excellent one, or is it, you know, according to the odor, is it rancid? Is it just a mid-October buck that's not ripe yet? But I'll mark those, even the doe ones I'll mark. The dates as well as how pungent they are. And they are also phenomenal to use when you're using a decoy because they're real. They are real. And if you capture those tarsals and get those shrunk wrap within a day or two of when you actually cut them off, they work really, really well because it is real. And as soon as you shrink wrap it, you're not allowing it to get any air, any bacteria whatsoever. When you take it out of the shrink wrap, I've used them 8 years later from when I killed them, and they were absolutely fine because they're shrink wrap. There's no oxygen in them. So those work good, and you can cut tarsals off freshly killed roadkills. You can go to a butcher shop, and they'll typically let you cut tarsals off. Just make sure it's something that hasn't been there for a week. So you want to get them as fresh as possible. I showed that video of the tarsals working, 2 different bucks in the same hunt coming in and literally licking the tarsals. So tarsals work phenomenally well because they're real. A lot of the commercial stuff gets oxygen in it and it doesn't smell like it's supposed to. It smells good to us, but that doesn't mean it smells good to a mature buck. That's the difference. So you guys that send me or reply with all these things, well, that worked for me. If you can't send me a picture of the mature buck you killed due to whatever it is you're saying worked that I said did not, typically does not, I really don't even want to reply to you, because if it worked on 1.5 and 2.5-year-old deer, yeah, that's good information for maybe a lot of hunters that's their target animals, and that's fine. If you're replying as if you killed a lot of mature bucks over something that I said doesn't typically work in general, please, if you're going to reply, send photos, send kill photos of the actual deer and the state and area you shot it in. Thank you. There's other decoys out there. I think any 3D decoy is going to work far superior to, you know, a straight line decoy, but I have had some success with Montana decoys. You just gotta, once they get up and start coming around to the backside where it's going to be a straight line, you got to do your thing. You got to take your shot. These decoys, 3D decoys, they'll come in, and I've had bucks knock my decoys over with their antlers. You know, knock them right off the spikes. So decoys work, but you got to be careful where you use them. Don't use them where there's a lot of does. Use them when you're targeting a specific deer, buck, typically, I would say. Also, there are decoys that have fur on them. Obviously, it's not real fur, but they have a fake fur on them to make them look more realistic. When you're using those, they hold odors big time because there's actually a fabric there or something that holds odors. So, not that there's anything wrong with those, you just have to be extremely cautious in how you use them. You want to make sure that they're stored outside. You know, before I would ever use one of those, I would probably set it up in my yard and let it air out for a couple of weeks before I ever even used it. And I'd probably hope it rained on it. Let it rain, dry it out, because then it's going to be pretty much scent free. And then put it in your scent free bag and handle it with your scent lock gloves, and you should be fine. But anyway, that's the deal on decoys. And again, this tail wagger, I can't say enough about a tail wagger. And again, they're made by Come Alive. I have no idea who the owner is. I'm not doing this for money. I don't care like everybody else does. But these work really well. I've had deer 80 yards away walking parallel to where I was at, and I had a decoy over here, and they were not going to see it because they were walking in weeds probably up halfway up their chest. And as soon as that tail flicked, they'd catch it out of their peripheral vision, and I mean, they would just turn their head and immediately stiff leg over to the decoy, and then I've shot them. So I've had that happen on a couple different occasions, once in Michigan and 2 times out of state. So they do work, but the tail wagger definitely helps bring deer in because it gets their attention and it adds realism to the decoy. If interested, the links to many of the podcasts I've been on, or for information about my 2-day whitetail workshops that take place in March and April, please visit my website at deer-john.net. Thank you for watching another episode of Eberhart Outdoors, and to receive notifications for future videos, please subscribe.